Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Thanks so much. We appreciate you tuning in. My name is William Jackie, and I'm the academic coordinator at Strive to Learn, and I'm an independent educational, excuse me, and I'm an independent educational consultant. And we are talking about a very relevant topic today for this time of year, for those of you who have high school students who are applying to college, and that is financial aid. And we're very lucky, very fortunate today to have a special guest, great friend of Strive to Learn, a certified educational planner, and her name is Katelyn Klapper. So very, very happy to have Katelyn today. Thanks so much for joining us.
I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. Just gonna wait for a couple more people to join in. So glad to see all of you that are tuning in so far, though. All right, Katelyn, how is the application cycle going for you so far in this unusual
Pretty
year?
busy for us. Yeah. No, it's we get started pretty early on the East Coast, it seems. A couple of Southeast universities that lots of students in the Boston area apply to, and they have October deadlines, which means that we are, we're right up against it right now. And for my students that want to come out to your side of the country, we actually look forward to a little break before the UC application opens. So
Right.
That's our break, but we're doing okay. Lots of questions though. It's a year full of questions.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very unusual year. Pretty unprecedented, but that's why we're here. Okay, so thank you so much. We'll go ahead and get started, everyone. So today we're going to talk about financial aid. So this is going to be an introduction to financial aid and to affordability. So let me introduce Katelyn. Katelyn Klapper has 30 years of experience working in higher education and college consulting. She's the founder of College Options LLC. She's worked on campuses of Boston University, Bentley College, and WPI, and she's been an independent educational consultant since 2005. She's an instructor at the University of California Irvine Certificate Program in independent educational consulting, which I am a graduate of, and Katelyn was actually one of my instructors. And she's also the chair of the Commission of the American Institute of Certified Educational Planners. So Katelyn, thank you so much, and I will turn the floor over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for the nice introduction. And I know everybody out there, it's probably lunchtime. I'm not sure if everybody's are you going to be hiding participants or not, but, feel free to grab your lunch while you're listening to me. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And get that going. So as William introduced, I'm going to be talking a little bit about financial aid in general. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the specific forms that families need to file for eligibility for financial aid. And I'm going to be talking about college affordability strategies that include building a list around merit money opportunities and touching just very briefly on outside scholarships. As I mentioned to, there we go. As I mentioned to William, every single one of these topics I could spend an hour on. So I could talk to you for an hour about the financial aid formulas and who gets financial aid and how that differs from merit aid. I could talk to you for an hour on the actual applying process, understanding the forms involved. And I could talk to you for an hour about affordability in your college search process and outside scholarships, and what I think about the current landscape and what we'll be expecting in the next 3 to 4 years. However, I only have 45 minutes because I also want to leave some time for your questions at the end. So as William is familiar, my lecturing style is a bit like a freight train. Ask you to strap in and hold on while I get going. I do speak pretty quickly, so Again, if you have questions at the end and need some clarity about something I covered, happy to try to answer those questions. And I do know too that Strive for Learn is going to be sending out a copy of PDF of these slides that I'm sharing with you today. So this information will be available to you after the webinar. Is that right, William? For Strive to Learn, clients, awesome. So these are the big areas that we're going to be covering. The first thing I want to really address is that for most of us who consult families, we really do look at overall college fit through the lens of three distinct areas, one being academic fit, one being personal and social fit, and the other being financial fit. And, you know, they all come together in that perfect access, hopefully, for your overall college fit and hopefully a number of good choices for you when you get to the end of senior year. The question of who's eligible for financial aid, I want to address from the perspective of both merit aid and need-based aid. I think that the term financial aid has really come to represent in many people's minds the combination of the two. And so sometimes I'll hear people say we make too much to be eligible for financial aid. And that might be the case if you're talking just about need-based aid. But most people are also talking about merit aid when they say financial aid. And actually, many colleges will slip into this language of talking about financial aid that includes both the need-based financial aid process and merit aid. So, you know, in my generation, we sometimes used to refer to merit aid as scholarship money. And scholarship money could be available from individual colleges and also from outside sources. So this merit aid, which again, I think kind of falls under the financial aid umbrella, is predominantly available through colleges. And I think this is one of the things that families are surprised to learn. So if you look at this here, what I'm saying to you is that 90% of the merit aid comes from colleges. 10% comes from private outside community sources. So those are your outside scholarships. We're going to talk just a little bit about that at the very end. How do you pursue outside scholarships? What do you look for? You know, commonly these are scholarships that can be used at any of the schools you attend. They do have to be disclosed to the college that you ultimately choose to attend. And again, we'll have some strategies for you around how to look for those. But I know that in my private practice, and I think that Strive for Learn approaches this in the same way, that we really focus our clients on a balanced list relative to merit aid possibilities if you are approaching college with a specific budget in mind. And that is because of this figure here, that 90% of the aid is coming, that merit aid is coming from the individual colleges. You'll see here that I have also another sort of percentage of grant money. So what's the missing portion? If I say 45% of grant money comes from individual colleges and another 7 to 8% comes from community sources, where's the other portion coming from? And the other portion of grant money is coming from state and federal sources. It's a little bit different when we use the term grant, because some grants are need-based. So when we use the word scholarship, most of that scholarship money is coming from individual colleges. In some sense, all families can qualify for financial aid. It's important, though, to know when you're looking at affordability, which schools don't provide any scholarship money. They only provide need-based aid. So here's a listing of a few schools that do not provide any merit money. I was cognizant of the fact that I'd be talking to predominantly California families this afternoon, so I did throw in a few of the California schools. Actually the majority, I would say, of no merit aid colleges do live in the Northeast. So there are fewer of these no merit aid schools on the West Coast, but Pomona is one of them. Pittsburgh is a school with very little merit aid. And I've given you a sampling here. Stanford also one with no merit aid except for some limited athletes. So it's important to know this as you head into balancing your list and looking for the possibility of merit aid. I'll be frank with you. In working with my families, I will say that the majority of merit aid is coming from the bottom half of my students' list. It's coming from the schools where they are a good target fit or where the school is a likely fit for them, a likely admit. Because these are the schools where they are at the top of the applicant pool, and the colleges want to recruit them to campus. Again, we're going to talk a little bit more about that and how that fit works. But before we do that, I want to introduce you to need-based financial aid. So in order to be eligible for any need-based financial aid, you need to file minimally the pre-application for federal student aid. This is required by all universities as a baseline, on top of which they might also ask you to file the CSS profile form or some of their own financial aid forms. You will find this to be most often the case in private universities, but there are a number of public universities. University of Michigan, University of Virginia have just introduced the CSS profile as part of their financial aid process as well. So that FAFSA is also needed if you intend to apply for student loans or Parent Plus loans. It's also needed by all states for their own distribution of state funds. So I know in California you have the Cal Grant. We have something similar in Massachusetts as well. Those state funds require the filing of the FAFSA as well. These are the general areas that we group need-based financial aid, grants and scholarships. And again, the most popular federal grant programs are the federal Pell Grants, and there are also some unique federal grants geared towards students who intend to be teachers and some other fields. And then there's those school-based grants that can be need-based or merit-based. But the need-based grants, you need to have financial aid forms on file with the colleges. Federal work study. I could ask for a raise of hands how many people had a work study job, how many parents in this audience today had work study jobs in college. I know I did. One of the things that's really wonderful about work study jobs on college campuses is they are in fact on the college campus. Students don't need to leave campus to work for 10 or 15 hours a week. Federal work study wages are also not taxed. They're federal funds, so they're not taxed again. And so the student receives the full hourly wage, and they can be used either for their tuition bills, their room and board bills, or in many cases, students will use federal work study wages for their personal expenses and their books. So that is a great opportunity to find something that fits your schedule. One of the things that I also talk about with parents is that work study jobs allow your child to have another significant contact on their college campus. And we talk about how contacts on college campus is a minimum of 3 contacts on that college campus are essential to a successful transition and matriculating through all 4 years. Oftentimes the work study supervisor can become a mentor to your student and be a really great connection. And I would say too that work study supervisors are also very cognizant clearly of the academic schedule, of finals week, of things that will come up that will make it more challenging for a student to, maybe be there, during those busy weeks. There's a little more understanding of and flexibility with hours and work study jobs on campuses. And then loans. As I mentioned, even if you do not qualify for grant or work study, which are, funds that you're not paying back, or we call work study a self-help. We also call loan self-help, but many families will not qualify for any other financial aid, but want to take out Parent Plus loans or student loans, and you can do that as long as you have filed the FAFSA. So that is really important. So these are, again, I could spend an hour talking to you about the nitty-gritty of all the details around need-based financial aid. The individual financial aid websites of the colleges that your students are applying to are great sources of information. I'm also going to give you a resource page at the end of the slide presentation for wonderful resources around filing the FAFSA, filing the CSS profile. So we will have some of those resources for you as well. So one of the things that's really important to understand about qualifying for financial aid is that there are two significant pieces here to the formula. There's the cost of attendance, which I'm going to tell you about in just a second, and then there's the expected family contribution. So oftentimes I'll see, Cal State Fullerton didn't give my niece any money. We're not going to find, we're certainly not going to get any financial aid. Well, the problem with that statement is that you're only looking at your niece's experience with one college. And if you're a resident of the state of California, you're also talking about an in-state tuition situation where, your niece's family might have made enough money to meet the cost of education at Cal State Fullerton, let's say, as an example. And so what you have to consider is the individual costs of each college you're applying to, and then what the schools and the federal government decide you can pay. And so those are the two big figures that we're going to look at. So the cost of attendance is the first part of this eligibility equation. And we look at direct costs like tuition and room and board, but we also look at books, fees, personal expenses, and travel to campus. I often will hear families say to me who are cost conscious, I don't want my child looking at, in my case, I'm in the Boston area, I don't want my child looking at, schools in California because that's going to be another $3,000 a year in travel costs. And what I say is, if you're looking particularly at a private university, they are actually going to be building in greater travel costs into your total cost of attendance when they look at awarding you a package. So don't let that travel cost initially sort of dissuade you from applying if you're on the edge of perhaps being eligible for financial aid. Understand that is part of the metrics that the college is looking at. The second piece is this expected family contribution, and this is also a quote that I hear a lot. I've done my initial expected family contribution calculation, and they say that we can pay $40,000 a year. We can't take that out of our annual budget. But here's the thing: the expected family contribution is based on what we call a three-legged stool. It's based on your ability to borrow. It's based on your current income and the sacrifices you're willing to make out of that income every year. And it's based on the assumption that you have done some savings for college. Even if you haven't, those are the assumptions that go into the formula. I always say, don't shoot the messenger. This is part of the formula. So this is a quote from the College Board. Colleges and the government assume that the primary responsibility for paying for college is with the family and the student. So this expected family contribution is a combination of guardian assets, family, parent assets and income, and student income and assets. That includes both the student and the parents. And the interesting thing about the financial aid formula is something that emerged about 4 years ago, which is a significant change in looking at income. The income that is going to be evaluated is what we call the prior year income. So let's use, for those of you who are listening today, if you have seniors, they are going to be entering college in the fall of 2021. The financial aid form that you are going to be filling out is for the academic year of 2021-2022. Do not fill out the 2021 form. You are going to be filling out the 21-22 form. And that form is going to be based on 2019 income. And that is because, well, it used to be the prior year, there were a lot of issues around getting families to file in time. The form used to not be available until January. Now it's available in October. You can actually start filling this out as soon as you get your FAFSA ID this month. So it makes it a lot easier to just be able to access that income information from 2019. You're actually able to download your tax returns with a direct retrieval tool. There's a lot of things that went into this change in policy. But the immediate question is, but what if I've lost significant income, particularly in 2020? Regardless, a college is going to want to see where you were in 2019. If there's been a significant change in 2020, then you give those colleges additional information. You tell them about the change in circumstances. And there's a lot of guidance around this, both on the individual, again, college financial aid sites, as well as on the FAFSA government site. But it's important to understand that this expected family contribution is not based purely on the income piece from last year, even though that's a big piece of it. It is also based on the expectation that you have been saving and that you're ready to borrow. So there are two types of expected family contribution formulas. One is what we call the federal formula or the federal methodology, and this is what uses the FAFSA. And again, there are thousands of schools that only require the FAFSA. And so it's important to look at what the possible differences are in just using a federal methodology versus looking at campuses that will use their own institutional methodology. Institutional methodologies are not the same from school to school. There's some baseline similarities. They're obviously looking at income and assets in the same way that the federal form looks at income and assets, but they might be looking at things a little bit differently. They might be taking into consideration home equity, which the federal form does not look at. They might be taking into consideration your educational costs for younger children. There are a whole host of things that institutions that use their own methodology look at. And some of the most significant ones are non-custodial parent income and the home equity assets. So I'm going to go into that just a little bit more detail. Again, this is one of those topics, as you can imagine, I could spend an hour on, but it's important to know that there are these two different ways of looking at expected family contribution. And I'm going to send you to a tool on the College Board site that allows you to look at both. And I recommend that if you are applying to private universities that require some additional forms, that do their own institutional methodology, that you do take a look at what that could look like potentially for you. So again, I'm not going to read through every single one of these bullet points. You're going to have access to these slides, so I'm going to assume that you guys can read along. Here we go, though. We're going to talk about primarily that federal methodology. It looks at parent income to a maximum rate of 47% of your income after some allowances. So these are some pretty significant allowances. So I don't want you to think of, oh, I'm making $60,000 a year, and they're going to, immediately assess 30% of that. I mean, $30,000 of that. There's some allowances that go into that calculation. So that's a maximum rate. And then parent assets. There's a protection allowance there, but we sort of give a ballpark of about between 5 and 6% of parent assets. You can see here that there's a significant difference between how parent assets are looked at and how student assets are looked at. So if your child has a savings account with some significant savings in it, colleges are going to look at that and say, we're going to assess at least 20% of that every year, because our assumption is that if your child has saved, they've saved for college. And that's going to be depleted down to nothing after 5 years in this assessment formula. Sometimes we talk about, if there's significant assets in a student's name, and I'm not talking about 529 plans, those are in your name, parent name, but if you're looking at, savings in a student's name, is it better to have it in a parent's name? You betcha, because it's going to be assessed at a much lower rate. Student income is protected up to over $6,700 a year. So don't worry about your student having a part-time job. They have I don't know very many high school students that can earn more than $6,000 a year. So I don't worry too much about this, for initial filing. Go ahead, if your student has a job, absolutely let them work. William, did you know that less than, I think this figure, that the last time I looked at this figure, less than 26% of college applicants have had part-time work. So about 1 in 4 have had part-time work. Yeah. And so it's actually kind of a more unique extracurricular activity than you might imagine. I think it's something that, colleges, clearly I feel look fondly on. There are a lot of students that need to work to help support their own family. So, that's definitely something that, we're not going to discourage students to do. So this is how the expected family contribution comes together in its most basic elements. Things that influence the family contribution or the expected family contribution are your income primarily, the size of your family, and how many of those children are in college at the same time, your assets, and the age of the oldest parent. And when I say assets, I'm in the federal formula, I'm referring specifically to non-retirement assets. So these are the things that they'll be asked questions about. Here are the things that are not counted in the federal formula: home equity, the non-retirement, the qualified retirement funds. And again, there's a very modest protection table for non-retirement assets. Oh gosh, I used to know this much better by heart, but I feel like right now the protection table was actually reduced quite significantly 5 years ago. So I feel like the oldest parent is 55, that the amount that's protected is less than $40,000. It's not a huge number. But these things are part of what goes into the formula. I do want to give you a few tips around filing the FAFSA. It is available to you now. It opened on October 1st. Again, what you are looking for is that 2021-22 form. That's the academic year. You're applying for financial aid for your child's freshman year in college. You are going to be filing every single year that they are in college. You need to create a FAFSA ID. If you haven't created one yet, if this is your first time through the process, then you need to create one, and so does your students. And then I would also recommend looking for, you can Google this, look for the web FAFSA on the web worksheet for the 2021-22 year. That will just give you an idea of what you have to have together, put together by when you get ready to file this online. These are some reminders about the forms that you'll need to have. One of the things that William and I talked about before I got online with you today is, why is it important to file the FAFSA even if you've determined that you won't qualify for financial aid or need-based financial aid? There are a couple of really good reasons. One, if you do decide that you need to take out a loan, you'll need a federal loan or a Parent Plus loan. You'll need to have that. That'll be a requirement, even if you don't qualify otherwise for need-based aid. There are a few very, very selective school-based scholarships that do require the FAFSA, even if they are purely merit-based scholarships. These schools want to know more specifics about who they're giving their money away to, again, even if the scholarship is predominantly talent-based or merit-based. And I say to all my clients, this is an insurance policy. If you have a significant change in income, the very first thing that the college is going to ask you for is your original FAFSA filing. They won't talk to you until you have a FAFSA on file. And then they're going to say, okay, now we can amend this with this new information about your loss of income. So you know already, again, if I'm talking to families here today who have had significant income loss in 2020, that 2019 income is going to look very different. You go ahead and file that, and then you reach out to the colleges individually and say, here's the scenario. We've had an income change. And they will have forms for you to fill out relative to those income changes. So that is why it is really important, particularly in the first year that you have a student leave for college, that you file the form. You can file the form and just keep the information for yourself. You get a student aid report. You can have that sent to yourself only and not sent to any colleges initially, if you choose to do so. This is what the financial aid FAFSA ID site looks like. You are going to be first looking, you want to create this ID. It takes a few hours to a couple of days to get regenerated and back to you. And then after you've created the ID, you're going to be logging in to file the FAFSA. And note here that you are either going to choose that you are the student or that you are the parent. But those are two distinct FAFSA IDs that you need to be aware of. I'm going to quickly jump to this notion of institutional methodology. This is, again, the formula that many private colleges use. Some scholarship funds use the CSS profile as well. This is, as I said, in boldface here, used for colleges to distribute their own funds. You could have 10 different ESC calculations from 10 different colleges. You could have one college that uses home equity fully in their calculation. You could have a college that caps their home equity calculation based on your income. There are some colleges that, for example, might say, we're going to cap home equity at 2.5 times the parent's adjusted gross income. So there's so many different variations based on the school's own priorities, on how they like to give away their own money. So keep that in mind. Some differences here about parent income relative to the institutional methodology and parent assets. Again, I'm not going to dwell on these too much. You can look at the slides when we're done with the presentation. But at the end of the day, we have the cost of the education, which could be $75,000 if you're applying to Boston University. What's the current cost of education at Cal State? Roughly 30,000, 35,000.
So let's see, I want to say it's closer to the range of 25.
25, that makes sense, yeah. So you could have, again, you could have on the top end one of the most, expensive private universities in the country, and on the bottom end you could have, a much more affordable in-state tuition, right? And if your expected family contribution is the same as that Cal State cost of attendance, you're not going to qualify for financial aid at Cal State Fullerton, but you might absolutely qualify for financial need and scholarship at Boston University or some other private university. I'm using that because it's in my backyard and it's the institution that I worked for 10 years, so that's an easy one for me to say. So that's the biggest variant here is the cost of education and whether or not you're going to have need. I also do want to drive home the point that income is the single biggest factor here in determining need. So what you've got here is 3 families that all have assets of $50,000 after retirement assets. But the income here is different by a factor of 2 or 3, and that then affects the expected family contribution. It's not the assets that's driving the difference in the expected family contribution. It is the income. This is a simplified example using a family of 4 with the oldest parent of 48. Okay, I know there's probably some heart palpitations going on there right now. So you need to make a plan of action for making college affordable. If you are, you're working on from a budget, you're looking at what you have in savings, what you're willing to take out of your income every year as your child leaves for college, and you're thinking about what you might be able to borrow. We always ask families to consider you know, what their whole child brings to the table relative to what they're going to contribute to these various college campuses, assessing the importance of name brand. You know, the very most selective colleges in the country happen to be the ones that also do not provide, many do not provide merit aid. Go ahead, you know, make sure that you're aware of what your EFC is. The best calculator is on the College Board. Just Google. I would give you the web link. It's just so long. But Google College Board EFC calculator and you get it. And again, remember that this is a three-part formula. We ask you to get acquainted with net price calculators. Where do you look? Well, on one hand, you don't have to look if you're aware of the colleges that do provide merit aid as part of their recruitment process. We call these recruitment awards. These are awards that you don't have to actually apply for. They happen in the admissions process. And I would say that 90% of college-based aid, and this is a rough estimate, is awarded at the time that the student is admitted without filing anything. And if you are a Strive to Learn client, they can help you identify this very easily on the tools that they use with their families. I know that Strive to Learn uses a tool called Guided Path with their families. And Guided Path has really easy visibility on the likelihood of your student getting merit aid at the colleges on their list. But it's important to know that this happens automatically for so many of our students. So what you want to do is also, if you're not a Strive to Learn client and you want to know how to do this on your own, the thing that we recommend is that you figure out what your EFC is and then go and look for the net price calculators at each of the schools that are on your child's list. This is a personal estimate of what your family will pay for 1 year college at that specific college or university. They can sometimes be a little hard to find. The best way to find a net price calculator is just do a Google search. This, I think, is for Clark University out in Worcester, Massachusetts. So, you know, we would have Googled Clark University net price calculator, and this is where we find it on their website. You can also usually find it on College Scorecard for the individual schools as well. You know, this gives you some tips on what to gather and be ready to use for those net price calculators. This is a sample of what a net price calculator might look like. It will tell you for this college, I think this was a Denison University. We plugged in some factors here, and they said this is the expected, you know, family contribution very high. This is probably a family with an adjusted gross income of over $200,000. They have an expected family contribution of $72,000, and you know they're not going to qualify for need-based aid. But at Denison, when we plugged in all the other things about the student, Denison said we're actually going to give you $25,000 based on what you're telling us about your student's academics. So that's part of what these net price calculators include is GPA and the rigor of the courses the student is taking and test scores. The one thing I will say is that there are some net price calculators that don't give you really good quality information. I'd rather have you go back to, again, if you're working with Strive to Learn, to their tools. The net price calculators that you have 8 or fewer questions are asking you enough information. They often have this telltale icon, which is the federal net price calculator, this base minimum that these schools are required to have on their websites. And it doesn't do a good job of actually calculating your merit aid possibilities. So do be aware of that. Learn to be a good net price calculator. If you're a family with a sophomore or junior, this is a great way to incentivize your students on, you know, keeping their grades up. And even in this era of test optional, we don't know what it's going to look like in the next couple of years after this cycle. You know, test scores can and do affect merit money. And I imagine that's not going to change dramatically in the next 3 to 5 years. I mean, we are going to see some shifts without a doubt, but it's not going to happen overnight. So, you know, look at, you know, how different colleges deal with home equity and the student information that you provide. here's a sample. Again, you'll be able to look at this in the nitty gritty when you get these slides. I know I'm hurrying up, so there's time for questions and answers. But this just gives you an idea of a sample that we tried here in our office with a phantom family and their assets and income, the student's academic profile. This is a top student, a straight A student with an unweighted nearly 4.0 GPA. There's some schools that gave them absolutely nothing. This was a student in Boston. The William and Mary Public University in Virginia gave them nothing. We had some schools that gave them more than $20,000 in grant money, and others that, gave them much less. Very, that's what you need to do. Early bird catches the worm. Start early. Think about how you can, continue to boost your profile as a student. I'm really talking to those now in the audience that are freshmen, sophomores, juniors. And if you're a senior right now, you are a strong candidate, you had a pretty consistent academic career, you happened to test before COVID-19 shut that down, the earlier that you apply, the better your chances are getting of merit aid, certainly. I don't want to scare those of you who aren't ready to do an early application. January is still on the early side. I start to worry about families that are waiting until February and March. Okay, planning early also allows you to think about applying for some of these more competitive scholarships. Some of these schools do have competitive talent-based scholarships that might require the FAFSA profile. They can also be attached to honors programs. These are scholarships that are often called the Dean Scholarship or the Presidential Scholarship or the Trustee Scholarship. They tend to be these premium level, often full tuition scholarships, often at private universities, and they might require additional essays, additional interviews, additional pieces of the application. So, and last but not least, outside scholarships. I told you, I don't spend a lot of time with this in my own practice, but in general, we say start local, move to state, move to national. To be eligible for national-based scholarships like a Coca-Cola scholarship or whatever you want. I had my daughter one year apply to the Nordstrom scholarship just to see what it was like. As we got deeper into the scholarship, we found out that there were actually 12 recipients a year, and there were 36,000 applications. Odds for that are not very good. You're much better off building an affordable list based on merit aid at an individual college level, but also starting in your own backyard. You do have to reveal these scholarships to the colleges. In many cases, the scholarship check will be written to the college, so they will know about it. It may be deducted from your overall school package. All right, you can appeal your financial aid awards without question. You absolutely should let colleges know if there's been a change in financial circumstances. And I'm going to give you, I often send families to Tuition Fit for a way to look at comparisons of specific school awards. And Swift Student is a great resource for templates on how to appeal your award packages. And then here are the resources that I promised you. Again, you're going to get the PDF of this presentation, so you can, don't worry about doing a screenshot or whatever. You'll get this later. Okay, that was a lot of information in a very short period of time. I think we have some time for a few questions.
Thank you very much. That was so informative. And we do have some time.
It's a lot, I know.
Yeah, and I know there could be more. That's the crazy thing. But yeah, that was very well paced, and you hit the mark. Thank you. Okay, so I'd like to invite anyone who does have any follow-up questions to use the chat feature on Zoom. If you just click on the chat icon, just go ahead and type your questions into there, and we'll work on getting through all of those. We have about 15 minutes. I do have a couple questions to start with in the meantime from registrants. So you did touch on this a little bit in one of your last couple slides, but there's a question about admission periods. Which admission period can I apply in to be eligible for financial aid from the college? So are there any additional points you would make as far as the advantages of applying EA or EA?
No, yeah, that's great. It's a great question. It's one of the very specific reasons why the financial aid process was moved back and why it does rely on the prior period income, because it was just a mess for families that were applying early action, early decision. And they would get sort of preliminary awards, and it was cumbersome. So now there's really no limitation at all. You know, the CSS profile and the FAFSA are both available to you on, and because it relies entirely on 2019 income, there's no guesswork. The one thing I will tell you as an additional filing hint is that you can't control the income from 2019. That's done, right? But you can control the day that you choose to file. It looks at, the filing looks at what are the balances in all of your accounts, including your checking account. So if you get your paycheck at the first day of the month, don't file on the first day of the month. File when your checking account is the lowest. I mean, I know that my checking account has a variance of many thousands of dollars over the course of the month. And that does go into the asset allocation, believe it or not. If you're thinking of buying a new car, not to avoid financial aid, but because you need it, or you have some other large purchases that are coming up, do those before you file, so that you are, you're representing, what is truly going to be your asset situation in the next couple of months. But if you're applying early action or early decision in the first round, so for many schools, that's anywhere from October 15th to December 1st, you can hit those financial aid forms now. And in fact, I would encourage everybody to do it now. Again, there's no reason not to, because we have the financial information, the income information available. So did I cover that fully?
Very, very good advice. Yeah, thank you. Okay, and another question from Tiffany Harris. I don't think I saw you today, but I'm thinking you'll probably watch this later. Hi, Tiffany. Is the FAFSA for state funds also? So I can share a little bit about California grants, but just in general, Katelyn, is there anything you'd like to address?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know of any states. I mean, arguably, I mean, my experience is pretty limited relative to that level of specific financial aid, because I do work in Massachusetts. But I used to live in California, so I am familiar with Cal grants as well. I am not aware of any state funding system that doesn't require the FAFSA to be eligible for their funds.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is for the Cal grant. There are two steps really. The first is to file the FAFSA, or for undocumented students, the California Dream Act application. The second step is to basically verify your high school GPA. There's a specific form that the California State Aid Commission wants students to fill out and then to submit to their school office to have their GPA verified. Once the GPA is verified by filling out the form, you just submit it to, basically just mail it to the California State Aid Commission. I will, in the chat, I'll go ahead and send the link to that website where you can find all the information about that. That is for most schools within the state of California. There's a list of 10 schools that do not use the Cal grant, but they're basically all for-profit and Bible colleges and things like that. Pretty much all of the private colleges and universities in the state, in addition to the public colleges, will be eligible for Cal grant as long as you're going to a California school. Some schools automatically submit the verified GPAs to the commission. And if that's the case, then the student would not need to do that on their own. So that's something that I would maybe recommend to you parents to check in with your guidance counselor. Find out if the school is automatically sending the verified GPAs to the California State Aid Commission. If that is the case, you would not need to do it on your own. However, if they are not doing that, you'd want to go to this link that I'm going to send and download the verification form to fill out. There's also the Chaffee grant, which is for students who are in foster care between the ages of 16 to 18. And there's also a newer one called the Middle Class Scholarship. And that is for students who are in their undergrad years and also for pursuing a teaching credential, for family income up to $184,000 and assets up to $184,000. Now, that is specifically for California public universities. So that would be for the Cal States and the UCs only, not for private universities within California.
Great. You also brought up something that, relative to asking guidance counselors for information about that reported GPA. In general, I find that, families ignore the great resources on the guidance web pages of their high schools, and I think sometimes, particularly when they are working with a private educational consultant, and I find that local high schools are sometimes the best resources for what's available in local scholarship aid too. So if you really do want to go down the path of outside scholarship, oftentimes your high school guidance office is the best source for that information. So, just a quick run through of your own guidance office's webpage might uncover some additional tidbits that you're unaware of.
Awesome. Okay, and we have a question from Michelle. Do state universities, i.e. U of Washington, give away as much money as private colleges? And she gave Washington as an out-of-state example for us.
Yeah, that's a great question. It really depends on the institution. So there are about, I believe I just saw this listed, there are at least 12 public universities, flagship universities in the United States that have more than 50% of their students coming from out of state. And some of them are states that wouldn't surprise you because they simply don't have enough high school graduates living in their state to fill their seats. So like the University of Vermont has fewer than 25% of its students coming from the state of Vermont. So I find that with those universities that rely on out-of-state students to genuinely fill their classes, you're going to see a little bit more generous merit aid available to out-of-state students. I would say by and large, universities that have thriving in-state populations, the University of California has a limit on how many out-of-state students can come into California. The same is true for Virginia, North Carolina, Texas. And so in these states where you have fewer than 10% of the students coming from out of state, you're likely to see less merit aid to recruit those students to come to campus. So that's just kind of a more rule of thumb, but it brings up an interesting also dynamic around public versus private. I just encounter so many people who say, well, we can only afford in-state tuition. Okay, well, that's great, but that doesn't mean that you can't find a comparably cost education in a private university if your student is at the top of that applicant pool. So for my families who attend UMass Amherst and are paying total cost of about $35,000 a year, we have them weighing similar kinds of costs with some private universities. So it varies quite a bit based on, again, how competitive your child is relative to that applicant pool for those colleges. Little off base there, but anyway.
Okay. Okay, so we have a couple questions that are pretty similar. So maybe I'll just read them both from Anna and Trina. For the FAFSA, if I am divorced, do we include who my daughter lives with, or does it matter? And another question, we have a divorced family. Do we only file with one parent's income?
So that has everything to do with what forms you're filing, right? So if you're filing just the FAFSA, it's the custodial parent. And if you're 50-50, you have to decide who's 51 and who's 49. If it's a school that requires more than the FAFSA, you're gonna see that there is a whole host of additional information required, and this is where that EFT can be quite dramatically different between a college that only requires the FAFSA versus a college that requires more information. So most commonly with those schools that are requiring a profile or their own financial aid form, they are looking for non-custodial parent income information. Again, they are looking at home equity. They're looking at a lot more financial information.
Yeah, absolutely. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the CSS profile definitely requires multiple parents,
Yes.
non-custodial parents. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Another question from Michelle. So if it sounds like she has signed up on the FAFSA as a parent, but can't figure out how to do the student sign up, do they need to sign the student up as a new user or through the already set up parent?
They both need to have their own ID attached to their own social security numbers.
So should I then apply for as if we're just doing a whole new FAFSA application? Just go to the FAFSA account and sign up my son, and he's a student, and they figure out that we're together?
Yes. I mean,
Okay.
you do include both, because here's the thing: you could have multiple kids, and each child is going to have their own EFT calculation. And the reason for that is that each child could have different income and different assets. So this is actually one of the things that it's in the slides, and I kind of went over it a little bit. But when you're doing with a school that's FAFSA only, the FAFSA calculation basically takes the family contribution and divides it in half if you have two kids in college at the same time. And what they're dividing in half is the parent contribution. So let's even say you had twins. I have seen the EFT for twins show up slightly different, only because one twin had a job or one twin had more savings than the other. And so it came out as a modestly different figure. But each child needs their own EFT calculation. So it's tied first to the student and second to the parent.
Great. Couple more questions, just a couple more minutes here. Okay, so when should we submit the FAFSA?
Whenever you're ready. Whenever you're ready. The FAFSA is definitely the easier of the two forms, so it's the best one to get started with. If you have to do both, you wanna do that one first. That'll be your warm up. The profile does ask for a lot more information. Let me piggyback on my comments about the FAFSA dividing the EFC equally if there are two children in college at the same time. The general rule of thumb for the EFC division, if it's an institutional methodology, is 60%. So it's 60% per child, and then it's 40% for three. So if you kind of do that calculation, you're basically, if you have two kids in college at the same time and they're both institutional methodology, it's 120% of a single EFC, which is it's kind of crazy. But again, it does mean that, that demonstrated need could look very, very different between schools that require only the FAFSA and schools that require additional information from the profile or their own forms. I haven't come up with a way to really describe that dynamic well. It's kind of crazy. Anything else?
Okay, do you have time for one more question?
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, so a follow-up to the question about filing as with divorced parents, divorced family. Is it better to use the divorced parent that has less income or less savings and assets?
What do you think? If that's the custodial parent. Absolutely. Absolutely. But that's going to come back at you if it's a school that requires the profile. I mean, that, you know, the non-custodial parent will be revealed for a college that requires the profile in their own forms.
Great.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
You got me just to the edge of my comfort zone with knowledge.
Well, it was
hopefully this was helpful.
It was a wealth of knowledge. It was very helpful. Thank you so much, Katelyn. Really a treat to have you share with us all. And thank you all who tuned in. We will have the PowerPoint to share. We will also have the recording of this if you needed to go back and review anything later. And just so everyone knows, on the horizon, we are going to have a part 2 of the financial aid webinar series. More information to come about that. But again, thank you so much, Katelyn, and thank you, Tom.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My pleasure.
And have a great day, everyone.
Thanks.